again, using my laptop camera because my phone or Google Photos has limited storage. And I don't know how long I'm going to go on. So I was just in a Grail Country stream and we were talking about forgiveness. And for once, I didn't have to get out because I was talking, because my perspective just cuts against the grain of what everyone else is talking about, and it can only mean annoyance for everybody involved. So usually I have to go in those streams only for a little bit and then leave. But this time it was good, and I think we had a good conversation. And it was about forgiveness of oneself and forgiveness of others. I think pretty much the conversation centered around that. I have some notes. Let's see. But I just have like staircase thoughts, as always. Let's see, where do I want to start with this? This is my little buddy from when we were stuck in Europe for 3 days, which at the time was miserable, but I guess it makes a good story now, as things do. But me and him are, well, it's not trauma bonded, because trauma bond means when you bond to an abuser because of your trauma. But there needs to be a term for the way that trauma bond is used practically, which is that you go through a trauma with somebody, and because of that, you're bonded. I don't know, there's not a term for that, but there needs to be. But he's actually very soft and like a nicely made little bear. Like, look, separate fabric, soft, removable hoodie. This comes off. And look at his little ears. They go in there. That's kind of silly now without the ears. Hey, baby. Yeah. And speaking of humility, I think a lot of the conversation also centered around like humility, because forgiveness does require a certain giving up of oneself, as well as a certain receiving from others, which is also humbling in a good way. I think there's bad humbling and good humbling, and the bad humbling is like, oh, I'm such a bad person. Like, that's not actual humility. Real humility is just being open. So I prefer to say openness rather than humility, because I think humility has just gotten all this like incrustation of connotation around it. But it's humbling, like being a system and having some littles who are literally just child parts who are still in the mindset or developmental stage of a child. They're important, and they're just as important as the rest of us who are like job, theology discussion, money, and whereas the kids are like, making doll clothes and things, and those are just as important and just as meaningful and just as much an embodiment of the divine. So as a system, with littles, you learn to be humble in that way and give them importance too. And I still have Gregory. My little baby. What's going on, Amazon? Oh, holiday beauty. I don't care. Oh, Amazon. Sometimes it's updates and sometimes it's an advertisement. I wanted to start. Some people were talking about. Okay, I guess we'll start with this. Yay, my crochet hooks are coming. But I've got like carpal tunnel now from crocheting and climbing, which sucks because I want to climb and I can't. I guess I should say we more often to remind myself that I'm still a system, because a lot of the time in these discussions I want to cut away a lot of who I am and just talk about the ideas, but you really can't do that. Like, my experience in life, our experience in life matters and is an important part, maybe the most important part of our ideas. And of course there's balance, but like, so that's why I'm making small talk. I don't know if I want to. Oh yeah, okay, I guess we'll go the way that I have in my notes. So a lot of people in the comments were irritated by the fact that talking about self-love and forgiveness of oneself are like therapeutic terms, and that it's shallow and that it's a platitude. To me, therapy can be genuinely spiritually helpful. To say that therapeutic terms or secular terms or terms of the culture are shallow and bad inherently, and unworthy of being brought into a spiritual discussion is another kind of divide than the self-other divide, which we're talking about. It's the sacred versus secular divide, which is false divide and cuts one off from a lot of truth, and from a lot of truth that balances out each other. Because, in a sense, you could see the sacred world and the secular world as kind of keeping each other in balance. And how I see it, a lot of time the religious world is very focused upon self-giving and self-denial and self-sacrifice, and therefore the secular world responds by pushing back and being all about more self-centeredness kind of thing. But it's a balance, and I think you need both parts, because there's no such thing as sacred versus secular, or rather they're on a higher level, they're synthesized. Everything is an expression of the divine and of truth. So to me, if I'm all about being humble and I get off on humility and giving up my own ideas, what I can do to be humble is investigate those secular terms and try and embody those and see what kind of fruit that bears for me, and see how genuinely helpful it is. Simple things that people roll their eyes at, I'm a good person, I have inherent worth, I'm a person, so I should be kind to myself. These are things that, between having a complex spiritual view and trauma, you roll your eyes at, and you want to just shove them away and say that's stupid. But actually, they can be valuable. And it is a humbling experience, in a good way, to experience the healing that can come from trying to embody a very simple secular concept. I mean, I don't think it's a secular concept, but the secular world tends to hold that view as opposed to the spiritual world. So yeah, but for me they're really mixed, but for a lot of people they're not as mixed. So yeah, I don't know, I don't see what's wrong with therapeutic terms. Yeah, and everything is an expression of the divine, everything is an expression of truth. And yes, this does also apply to me, kind of scorning terms that for me are not useful or central to me, like self-denial or self-hatred or self-sacrifice. Genuinely for me in my journey, those things I do not focus on. They have not been the vessels of truth to me, right? Because, okay, truth, I'm not sure if I'm too tired to do this. And I have therapy soon too, so it's going to be a thinky day today. I want to say it though. Truth is not evanescent. Oh my god. Transcendent, thank you. Truth is transcendent. It cannot be fully expressed in any vessel, whether that be a word, a body, vessel. And so you can get the truth for a person can be embodied in one term or another, and sometimes these two terms can seem to be opposites, but really in each of their fullest meaning, they are each expressing the truth, or they're each a true expression of the truth, even though they may seem to be opposites. And so I think that happens sometimes because for me, the way to the truth of the proper relation of God, self, and other has been through going completely hedonist, essentially, and self-centered in the sense of I'm going to put myself first and make choices for myself, and I will try to expand myself to include others so that I have empathy for them and I feel what they feel, and when they are happy I am happy, and therefore then I can become what looks like unselfish, but it's not. It's the same. I do it for pleasure, and that has borne the fruit of the Spirit in my life, and that's what bears the fruit of the Spirit in my life. I cannot think of a time where I've ever borne the fruit of the Spirit from thinking, oh, I'm going to ignore myself and do this for another person. It's always through, at least in this stage in my healing, it's always through, oh, you know, they're a part of me, and I can feel a happiness in them, therefore I want to do this thing. And that's what keeps me right and keeps me discerning well. But for other people, I think it's possible that, so I've kind of leaned fully into the side of pleasure and selfishness. Goodness, I'm really not thinking straight. And that has become an embodiment for me of the full truth of the relation of self and others, which cannot be, it can't be completely expressed in either side, but I've leaned into this one side and really leaned into it and kind of gotten to where it contains its opposite. I am selfless by being selfish. And there may be people who come the opposite direction, and they are selfish by being selfless. And so for them, they might take a term like self-denial or death to self and really lean into that and see the internal and the deepest workings of it, and through that come to a healthy view, to where paradoxically, just like I say I'm being selfish and living for my own pleasure, but you see me doing things for others and being selfish and being giving of myself, they might say I'm self-denying and living completely for others and hating myself, but they're a glowing and, like, vibrant person, and they're happy too, and they have a healthy relationship with themselves. Both are possible. So, I don't want to completely scorn objectively a term like so you have these embodiments and these vessels of the truth, and certain of them have not been the way for me. They've been very peripheral, like self-denial. That's not something that's a useful way for me to use that term. I can't understand the truth through that. But for some people, they may understand the truth through that. So, I can still say, be open to the value in that, because it may be valuable for somebody else. Yeah, so it applies to me too, as far as, yeah. So, the other thing has to do with, but now speaking of like the self-other divide, which is what we kept talking about, and how that makes you misunderstand a lot of these things about self-love and forgiveness. Coming back to my perspective now, where I'm leaning into like being self-centered, because I can only speak from my perspective. I'm acknowledging that other people may have a different path, but I have to be myself, and I have to present the truth as I live it. I can't embody everything, and that's humility. And to me, that's what the crucifixion means, is like becoming particular and leaning in and being fully what you are, even if that means that you're going to make mistakes, or even if it means that you're only going to be an incomplete, like that your expression of the truth is going to be particular, and therefore there's going to be other ones that have to balance yours out or something, overall. I've just woken up. So a lot of what inhibits each side from seeing the other's perspective as far as the whole, forgive yourself, don't forgive yourself, or don't focus on that, is living in the divided world. And Luke really said this well. I mean, he pretty much said it. I have a visual aid that I like to use, though, and let me draw it real quick. I have like an envelope. So this is the way that I see it, and the way that it has finally made sense to me and clicked about like unselfishness and all of that after years of struggling with it and just not getting it. This is how it clicked. Excuse me. This is how it clicked for me. So we have, let me think if I want to do this. Yes, okay, I got it. Oh, dang it, this pen does not work. Oh, yes, it does. Yes. Okay. So I'm drawing a bunch of circles, and I will show you them. Okay, so the divided world, or divided self, or divided man, or whatever, is kind of like this. And the way that I see a lot of traditional religious moral injunctions to be selfless is that people take them like this. So they say, there's myself and there's the other, or the world, or like God. Or you could also see it like this. There's myself and there's the other. And I'm just going to say self and other, and that could also kind of include, I'm just going to say self and other to make it simple. Instead of putting God as a third party, I could do that, but that's too many circles. So myself and other. And then they say, okay, self bad, other good. Within the bubble of myself, there's all this hatred. There's this, myself doesn't matter. Myself is bad. I'm bad. But toward others are good. And what I'm giving outward must be different. I'm giving inward hatred, being hard on myself, denying myself. And outward, I'm giving good and love and forgiveness. Over here, and if you view them as separate, it kind of makes sense, because you could view it as like a balance scale, like this, like, okay, if I'm really leaning into myself, then the other is neglected. So I should really not lean into myself. I should really do nothing for myself so that the other can thrive. If you view them as separate, that kind of makes sense. It makes sense to say, if I hate myself, I could love others. If I deny myself, I can do more for others. And I want to do more for others because I want the world to be unified, etc., etc. So that makes sense given this divide. It's a zero-sum game, and what you take for yourself, take away from others. So don't take anything for yourself, and the world can be saved. But the truth of reality, hello Jason, is more like this, where, as Luke was saying, you can't draw a hard divide between self and world, between selves and other selves, between the self and God, between the self and the other. There's overlap. Separate yourself from your body, separate yourself from the air, from another person, from your parents, from your friends, from your spouse, from somebody on the other side of the world. You can't. We're all connected and overlapping. And so you can see that here it's not this zero-sum game. And it's not this kind of simple thing where if I deny myself, I am lifting others up. It's all overlapping. So here you can see that there's no difference. We need to have the right spirit just throughout all the circles. And that includes the circle of myself, and that includes the circles of the selves that overlap with mine. So what I need to have is this loving openness within myself, outside of myself, and it's the same. It's the same because it overlaps. And you can see that if I have a hatred within myself, then I will be spilling that out into the world. And of course, if I have a hatred out to the world, that indicates that I'm having this hatred toward myself. And yeah. So there's no divide. Hard divide. There are many divides also. Like, you can draw the line a bunch of different places, but there's no hard divide between self and other. Therefore, if you genuinely hate yourself, are down on yourself and you say, I'm bad and others are good, and that's your principal belief, it's bad. It's just going to be bad fruit. The way that I understand selfishness, that helps me to see both sides, and that helps me to see the value of giving up myself for others, is like this, like, everything is one, right? Like, everything is one's self. And what is good, as we mature, we get a bigger and bigger self. And when you're somebody who's selfish, what that means is you have a small self. The things that bring you pleasure are things that literally pertain to, like, your body and mind, and that's it. Nothing else. And maybe your possessions, and maybe, like, but then what happens when you start to become selfless is you simply expanded yourself to include, say, a houseplant that you like keeping alive, or a pet, or a spouse, or your friends, or maybe the whole world. And to me, it's a lot simpler to just say this person has a small self versus a large self than to try to do this whole thing of like, this person hates themselves and loves others, and it's just a lot of maths that I think doesn't need to be there. For me, it's very simple to say, how big of a self do I have? Because for me, when I'm being selfish and unselfish, it kind of feels the same. Like, when I do something that's good, I have pleasure. When I eat a good meal, I have pleasure. When I make a meal for somebody that I love who's sick and give it to them, I have pleasure too. Because they're part of myself. It's the same. They're members of my body, you know? And I don't, in my experience, that has not been a dangerous philosophy for me to have. I see that it bears a lot more of the fruit of the Spirit than when I was trying to do the math part and trying to do the whole this, assuming a divide between myself and others. That just got so confusing for me. So yeah. And then we were talking about the mountain and going up the mountain of, like, I guess you would say spiritual, like, perspective, or perspective and enlightenment. There we go. As you are down at the bottom of the mountain, you can't see the forest for the trees, and you're just caught up in all of the little details, and you can't necessarily put the pieces together. As you go up, you get more of a perspective on the whole picture, and when you're at the top of the mountain, you can see everything. And it's kind of difficult to communicate between levels, and I think that's what analogy and metaphor and parable is for. Communication between levels of reality. But then the other aspect is that there's not necessarily a strict moral hierarchy where being up here is good and being down here is bad, because it kind of goes in cycles. You go up and then you go down and up again. Or rather, you could see it as one journey of going up and up and up, or you could see it as kind of this journey of coming up and down and up and down, and eventually trying to bring the up and the down to one point of synthesizing. You're constantly pulling these threads, the highest and the lowest, and synthesizing. And that's what Christ is about. I don't know if you're getting my mental imagery here. This is how my thought works, is very much in images and feelings and like movement. But yeah, so we have the going up the mountain of enlightenment, and then coming down as in applying the principles, and then this movement of synthesis between the highest and lowest. That's what you're doing when you're moving up and down. Constantly bringing the most extreme ends to a point, and that's what holds reality together. But going back a little bit, I do this constantly. Like, I'll try to be making a point, and then I just go way, way abstract, like way big picture, and then I kind of lose what I'm trying to say. But going back to the image now of just going up the mountain as far as getting more overall perspective, and being down as far as being caught up in the details. What we have to do is go up, get a sense of the big picture, all this, what I'm doing right now, like talking, and having the image in my mind and the map, like in my mind of the big picture of reality, which is so beautiful. But then I have to come down and apply it and kind of get my hands dirty and, well, finish this video, go make my breakfast, finish dressing up, mittens. What else am I going to do today? Look at the rain. That's going down the mountain. And that is just as important. And it's hard to do that, because going down from kind of the realm of the spirit toward the realm of the flesh means that necessarily how the flesh works is it is composite, and it is imperfect, like it is composite. And how it works is you make mistakes and you get forgiveness. And it's changing and growing. Up here, you get more of a crystallized view, where things are eternal and perfect and immutable, and it's beautiful. and kind of more safe. But then down here you get, again, things that are more partial and particular. And simply the way that that realm works is the transaction of it is mistake and forgiveness, and good and evil, fighting it out and things. And the whole point of Christianity is that in order to truly embody this high part, we have to come down and fully immerse ourselves in the sea of matter, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin says. And yeah, forgiveness is, Jason I'm sure would say, forgiveness is the entire essence of living in the flesh. Because that's how it works, you have to be open to both give and receive and let it flow through you. Yeah. But it can be, again, humbling in a good way and scary to let go of that perfect and beautiful and true picture in order to kind of just live. And when I was in Italy, I had a thought about this, and I can't quite remember it, but it was I don't remember. But it was a specific kind of way of saying this. In order to fully experience reality, sometimes, in order to fully experience reality and be fully immersed in it, I have to let go of everything, including my self-consciousness and my knowledge of what's going on and my predictions or knowledge about the future or the nature of what I'm doing, and just live, whether that be pleasure or pain. And almost not even know what I'm doing, just do it. Because any kind of analysis detracts from living in the eternal present. And obviously, analysis is also a kind of experience, and there is a time to go up and to be analyzing, and you go up and down. But yeah, and it's, to me, this is Hamlet, because everything is Hamlet for me. But the way that Hamlet spends so much time up here, too much time up here, trying to figure out what's good and bad, thinking and not being able to act. And then eventually at the end he says, and it's a movement of humility and trust and vulnerability and risk. And he says, there is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we will. And he just does good the best that he knows how. Even though he knows in his mind, he's picked it all apart and he's gone into the future and he's followed it out, and he knows that it's an imperfect situation, and he knows that whatever he does is not going to be perfect, and is not maybe going to fix things, and maybe he's in the wrong, and maybe this is all a trick, and etc., etc. But in the end, he just says, okay, this is my role, this is what I have, and I'm going to do it. And he does. And again, that puts you in the realm of mistakes and forgiveness. And that's okay. Because when you're open like this, forgiveness is just, it just flows. Communion is free between the self and the other selves. And communion is reopened when there's a blockage, and it just flows. Because we're eating from the tree of life and not the tree of good and evil. Something like that. Sherry said something about Saint Sophrony talking about self-hatred. And how self-love, the perfectest self-love and the perfectest self-hatred synthesize. And I agree with that. I agree with that. Because again, like I say, the truth obviously is synthesis of any expression of it, and it synthesizes opposites. And the truth, full reality, is something that's transcendent above any expression of it. And the same truth can be truly expressed in both opposites at the same time. And so sometimes one, perfect self-love and hedonism and pleasure, and sometimes the other, complete self-hatred, self-renouncing, pouring oneself out, perfectly embody this truth, which is the proper and true relation of self and other. And the way that I think about this, the image that I think is best for this is like if you're making love to somebody that you love as an expression of love. And I guess I have to say this. I'm not saying that that's the only purpose of sex. I'm not saying that you can't be allosexual and just go out and do it as an act of, as a less like meaningful act, and just do it. Because that's kind of like being somebody who prepares a meal. Because any action can be an embodiment for like this sacred meaning. Like I can prepare a meal incredibly carefully and every detail and eat it really like slowly, and it's an act with someone that I love, and it's an act of communion, and it's the sacred thing. Or I can just be hungry, grab something out of the fridge, eat it. And honestly, the same person can do both. But if I'm somebody who always like prepares meals really carefully and treats it as a sacred thing, I shouldn't judge someone who, I should keep doing that, but I shouldn't judge somebody who just grabs something out of the fridge and eats and is just feeding their body. Like, it's fine, you know. No physical thing is so sacred as to always have to be like, that's idolatry. But going back to sex as like making love and an act of the highest communion between two selves, what you have in that is, in my opinion, what you have in that is like what Sherry's talking about this complete synthesis of self-love and self-hatred, or selfishness and self-giving, because you have completely like desire and possession and taking and hunger, and also complete pouring out of self and forgetting of self at the same time.